use. We will now move on to topical questions, and I call it question number 1, Willie Rennie.
Responses to a recent report by Enable Scotland that highlights that over 250 people with learning disabilities are living in NHS Scotland, with one woman being there for 60 years.
Can I confirm that the Minister was able to hear enough of Mr Rennie's question?
I think I got the gist of that, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Please respond.
Presiding Officer, it's completely unacceptable for people with learning disabilities and more complex needs to spend long periods of time in hospital. That is why the Scottish Government and COSLA commissioned a working group to look at this issue in March 2020, and the report of the group is expected to be published in the next few weeks. We have already allocated £20 million of funding in 2021 to integration authorities to significantly reduce out-of-area placements and hospital stays by 2024. The report includes recommendations for a framework that directly addresses Enable's concerns, a national register and a national panel to support it. This is vital. In addition, the Scottish Government is bringing forward legislation to establish a Commissioner for Learning Disabilities and Autism. The role of that Commissioner will be to fully protect rights with a range of statutory powers that could include bringing individual cases. Visibility and accountability are critical, and the Government fully intends to move forward and ensure that people with learning disabilities and complex needs have a home in their communities. We need strong partnerships, nationally and locally, to make this happen without delay.
Willie Rennie.
I mean, the problem is that the Government have been declaring this as an urgent priority for years. There were reports in 2018, and the original right to their own home was declared back in the year 2000. Yet 21 years later, 250 people with learning disabilities are stuck in hospital, and the guidance required last year has still not been published. So I hope the Minister understands there's quite a lot of frustration out there. Some authorities think that multi-bed units are appropriate, but that is just a new form of institutionalised living. Will the Minister rule out multi-bed units?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I understand some of the frustration that is out there. I've heard that frustration when I've talked to folks with lived experience and people actively involved in the learning disabled and autism communities. The guidance that is issued on the Community Change Living Fund is clear that it should be used to design community-based solutions that negate or limit future hospital use and out-of-country replacements. Going forward, we will work closely with HSCPs to ensure that funding is spent in line with the guidance and the contents of the upcoming delayed discharge report when published. I think the use of the term multi-bed unit is not a good one. We know that people can share homes and thrive well. That happens here in my constituency in Aberdeen Central and across Scotland. But the use of the term multi-bed unit tends to lead me to think, and I'm sure Mr Rennie is of the same view, of an alternative to hospital. That is not what we want here. We want people to have homes in their communities.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I agree with Willie Rennie's concerns, which he's expressed, but specifically we've seen already this year the practice, an unlawful practice, of sending elderly patients to locked Scots care homes and units, and that being banned, and NHS Glasgow specifically being taken to court for that by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So can I ask the Minister, specifically looking at the data which has been uncovered on this, will the Scottish Government agree to an independent review of all vulnerable individuals living in these facilities?
Minister.
Presiding Officer has gone through the process of a short life working group looking at all of this. We will act on their recommendations and act on the recommendations and asks of Enable as we move forward. What we have to ensure, and this is, I agree completely and utter with Mr. Briggs, is that in all of this, we take a person-centred approach, looking at people's needs individually, and that we put human rights at the very heart of all the work that we do in this regard.
Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we've already heard, Enable Scotland's report calls for a community first principle, the commissioning of support for all adults and children who have a learning disability in Scotland. The report welcomes the Community Living Change Fund, which has £20 million ascribed to it. But what Enable Scotland have said in the report is, and I quote, "It's not a lot of money for a per HSCP area and per person." And indeed, they go on to say that hasn't always led to real and meaningful action for people in communities. So will the Minister share evidence of how that fund is being used? And will he commit to further national funding to build the availability of high quality, sustainable support in every community?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I am more than happy to keep Parliament informed of how that £20 million is being spent. I can assure Parliament that I will be keeping a very close eye on how that resource is being utilised. And of course, as we move forward, in order to get this right, we will have to look at further resourcing in the future to ensure that we do our level best for those folks with learning disabilities and more complex needs.
Gillian Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Enable Scotland's report highlighted that people with learning disabilities may be placed in inappropriate settings, such as care homes for elderly people. What action can the Scottish Government take to ensure that provision of appropriate residential care for younger people, including those with learning disabilities, is expanded?
Minister.
I didn't quite get all of that, but what I would say to Ms Mackay on her final point is that we have got to get this right for everyone. And we need to listen to individuals around about what their needs are. And we know that the needs of young people are often different from older folks. So in order to get this right, we need to ensure that we're listening to young people and their families to ensure that the right provision is in place so that folks can lead as free and independent lives as possible.